StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories, where biblical stories of the ages come alive.
We don't know what Jesus did on Wednesday. The Bible says that he went every morning to the temple and taught all day, and perhaps Jesus did the same on Wednesday. But nothing's told about what he taught or about anything that happened on Wednesday. It's possible that Jesus could have made an exception on Wednesday, and he perhaps spent the day quietly in Bethany with those who loved him so. We just don't know what he did on that day. We hope that he was able to spend some quiet time with his loved ones there in Bethany, because if he did, it would have been his last quiet day on earth. Continuing with our series on the life of Christ, this story from the Bible is titled Thursday.
Precious memories.
StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories with your host, Dr. Joe Jackson. Stories directly from God's holy word, told in easy-to-understand story form that the whole family will enjoy, and featuring the work of a talented artist illustrating each week's story. Now gather the family, because it's time for this week's Bible Story.
Thursday was the last day of the Passover feast, and in the evening of that day, the Passover lamb was eaten. Every family of the children of Israel had a lamb on this day, which the father took to the temple. And there the lamb was killed, and the priest burned the fat on the altar. The father then took the rest of the lamb home, where it was roasted and eaten with bitter herbs. If a family was too small or too poor to eat a whole lamb, 2 or 3 families ate one together. We've seen before that Jesus and his disciples formed a sort of family themselves, and so they ate the Passover together at this time. On this Thursday morning, Jesus said to Peter and John, "Go into Jerusalem and prepare the Passover that we may eat it." And the disciples said, "Where shall we go?" They asked Jesus this because they didn't know of any place where they'd be welcome. Jesus answered, "When you come to the city, you'll meet a servant carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he enters and say to the master of the house, 'The master wants your guest chamber for a place where he can eat the Passover with his disciples.' He'll show you a large upper room furnished with tables and couches. Use that room and make the supper ready there." Peter and John went to the city, and they found everything just as Jesus had said, and they prepared the Passover supper. When Thursday evening came, Jesus and the other disciples joined Peter and John. There seems to have been a little trouble about choosing their seats at the table in the upper room, for they didn't yet know the lesson that Jesus had tried so often to teach them. He taught this lesson to his disciples once again, and this time in a way that they never forgot. Not only was there trouble about the seats at the table, but no one was willing to take the part of a servant and wash the dusty feet before they began to eat. We've already seen that this was one of the things that needed to be done in that country, because the people then didn't wear shoes and socks as we do today, but they wore sandals, just sandals, fastened onto their bare feet. A walk of several miles over the dusty roads would make them very uncomfortable. And if they had a servant, one of the first things the servant would have done for them would have been to wash their feet. So Jesus waited until all the disciples were seated, and it was certain that no one was willing to do a servant's work. Then, rising from the table, Jesus took off his outer garment, got a basin of water, and began to wash their feet, and to wipe them with the towel which he would have had put around his waist the way servants did. The disciples must have been very surprised and no doubt ashamed and embarrassed to see their master, Jesus, doing this work. But no one seems to have said anything until it came Peter's turn to be washed. Perhaps they were too ashamed or embarrassed to speak. But Peter said, "Lord, why do you wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You don't know now why I do it, but you will know sometime." Peter was not willing to let it be done, and he said, "You shall never wash my feet." And then Jesus said, "If I don't wash them, you cannot love me, for my friends are willing to obey me." Well, Peter did love Jesus, loved him dearly, and though it wasn't right for Peter to hold back, he just couldn't bear to have Jesus do for him the work of a servant. And yet Peter did so because of his love and respect for Jesus. So if being washed by Jesus showed that Peter truly loved him, then Peter was more than willing that it should be done. And so he said, "Lord, wash not only my feet, but my head and my hands as well." Jesus understood Peter. He knew that Peter loved him and was trying hard to be loving and pure like his master. So Jesus said to Peter, "He that is clean needs only to have his feet washed. And most of you, my disciples, are clean, but not all." Judas was with them, and Jesus knew of the bargain that Judas had made with the rulers of the children of Israel, and that's why he said, "You're not all clean." After Jesus had washed the feet of his disciples, he put on his robe again and sat down and said, "Do you know what I've done to you? You call me your master and your Lord, and that's right. If I then, your master and Lord, have washed your feet, you ought to be willing to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you should do to others as you would have them do to you. The servant's not greater than his master. You'll be happy when you've learned this lesson." The lesson was not one that everyone must wash the feet of others. Well, that's not the custom today, as it was then. But the lesson was that we must be ready to do anything to help our friends, even the humblest, most disagreeable things. The time was now drawing near when Jesus must give up his life to save all the people of the world. He surely must have looked troubled and sad as he said, "One of you is going to betray me." To betray means to give someone up to his enemies. How sad it was that one of the men Jesus had taught and loved so much should turn out to be so wicked. And the disciples looked around at one another, wondering who it could be. First one and then another asked Jesus, "Lord, is it I? Am I the one?" Judas was one of those who asked this question. But probably the rest of the disciples didn't hear the answer. For Peter motioned to John, who was close to Jesus at the table, to ask Jesus who would do such a terrible thing. And then John asked, "Who is it, Lord?" And Jesus answered, "It's the one to whom I shall give a sop after I've dipped it." Dipping the sop was another custom of the children of Israel. On the table there was one large dish of food, and usually each one at the table was put his fingers into this dish and take from it what he wanted. But sometimes one person would dip a piece of bread into the dish and then pass the bread and whatever came out of the dish with it to somebody else. That was the sop. And that's what Jesus now passed to Judas. And as he gave it to Judas, he said, what you're going to do quickly. The other men at the table didn't know what Jesus meant. Some of them thought that perhaps because Judas carried the money bag, he had been sent out to buy something for the feast or maybe to give something to the poor. But Judas knew what Jesus meant, and he went out at once. It was now Thursday night, and it was dark. After Judas had gone out and only those were left who truly loved Jesus, came what we usually call the Lord's Supper. Jesus took some of the bread that was on the table, and after he had thanked God for giving it to them, he broke it into pieces and he gave it to his disciples, saying, take this and eat it, for it stands for my body, which will be broken for you. And then Jesus took a cup of wine, and after again giving thanks, he passed the cup to his disciples, and he said, drink ye every one of this, for it stands for my blood, which is shed to wash away your sins. And from that time until now, in the church service, people eat the bread and drink the wine in memory of Jesus' death. We call it the communion service or the Lord's Supper. After this, Jesus and his disciples sang a hymn. While we can't be certain, we can probably assume that this hymn was, While we can't be certain, we can probably assume what this hymn was, because the children of Israel always sang certain psalms after they'd finished eating the Passover, and those were probably what were sung now. And those were probably Psalms numbers 115 through 118, and you can read them yourself in your own Bible. After singing the hymn, Jesus and his disciples left the house and went out to the foot of the Mount of Olives, where there was a garden where Jesus had often been before. And as they walked along, he talked to his disciples, and he said some of the words that have been the most precious to all who love him. And Jesus began by telling them that his death was to come now very soon. And he said, little children, I'll be with you now only a little while longer. And I'm going where you can't follow me now, but sometime you will come to be with me. There's one thing I want you to be sure and remember, and that is to love one another, even as I have loved you. If you do that, everyone will know that you have learned from me. Peter said, Lord, where are you going? Why can't we follow you now? And Jesus answered, probably very sadly, this very night, you and all the rest of my friends will leave me, and you'll be ashamed to say that you ever even knew me. Peter couldn't believe that such a thing could ever happen, and probably with great sincerity said, Lord, even though I should die with you, I will not deny you. All the other disciples said the same thing. But we shall soon see that Jesus knew them best, after all. He tried to comfort his friends, for they were all feeling very sad. So Jesus said, let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. I'm going to my Father's house, and there's room there for you too. And I'll go and prepare a place for you. And then I'll come back again and I'll take you with me so that where I am, you'll be there also. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. And no man can come to the Father unless he loves me and comes in that way. He that learns what I have taught and keeps my commandments, he's the one that loves me. And he that loves me shall be loved by my Father, and I will love him. I'm the vine, and you are the branches. And unless the branches cling to the vine and draw their life from it, they can't bear fruit. And neither can you do good works unless you cling to me. Remember my command that you love one another. The world will not love you for the same reason that they haven't loved me. They'll put you out of the synagogue. They'll put you in prison. They'll even kill you because you cling to me. But when the time of trouble comes, remember what I've told you, and remember that you are not suffering any more than your master did before you. I won't be here to help you. I'll be with my Father. But if you ask the Father to help you for my sake, he will do it. With these words and many more, Jesus comforted his beloved friends, and he told them what to do after he left them. And then, lifting up his eyes to heaven, he prayed. He prayed to the Father and asked him to keep these men pure, to help them remember what he had taught them, and to give them the power to go into the world and teach other men what they had learned. Jesus prayed, too, for all who should afterwards be led to love him and to trust him through these people, his friends. And when their earthly work was done, as his was now, Jesus asked that they might also be taken to live with the Father in heaven. They had now reached the little garden near the foot of the Mount of Olives where they were going. This garden was called Gethsemane. Jesus had often taken his disciples there, and he loved it dearly. And when they came into the garden, Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit down here now while I pray." And then taking Peter and James and John with him, he went a little further on, and he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful. This trouble seems more than I can bear. Stay here and watch." And then he went on alone, and he fell on the ground and prayed, "Oh, Father, if it be possible, save me from this great sorrow. Yet not my will, but thine be done." The three disciples heard this much of the prayer, but when Jesus returned to them for comfort, he found them not watching, but fast asleep. They were his three dearest friends, but even they were not ready to help him now when he needed them and their help so much. And Jesus said to Peter, "Simon, couldn't you watch with me 1 hour? You'll need to watch and pray, or you'll fall into temptation. You want to do right, but you're very weak." Again, Jesus left Peter and James and John to pray for strength. And again they heard him say, "Father, if this trouble cannot pass from me, and I must bear it, may thy will be done." Jesus came to his three disciples once more and again found them sleeping. For the third time, Jesus left them and prayed in the same words while they slept. And when he came back the third time, he said to them, "Sleep on now, take your rest, for the time has come when the Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of sinners." But their sleep for that night was over. And sleeping when they should have stayed awake caused them to lose their last chance to help Jesus. Do you think you would have stayed awake with Jesus if you'd been there with them? Perhaps you would have. And we all should hope that we would have stayed awake to help Jesus. But none of us knows what we would have done. And we mustn't blame them. They were very tired. They were weary. It was late. And they had spent a hard and very sorrowful Thursday.
Sent from somewhere to my soul.